When I was really little, my parents used to let me stay up late on the weekends to watch TV until I fell asleep. I cherished those nights. It felt like a special treat, having the whole living room to myself after everyone else had gone to bed. I'd stretch out on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, and fight to stay awake just because I could. One night, I was in my usual spot, eyes heavy, teetering on the edge of sleep, when I heard it, a noise coming from the front porch. It was subtle at first, like a faint creak, but as I focused on it, I realized it was the sound of our old-fashioned porch swing. It was moving back and forth, the chains groaning softly in the night. My chest tightened. Something felt off. Curiosity and fear wrestled inside me, but I couldn't just ignore it. I crept toward the bay windows, my bare feet silent on the carpet, and peeked out, trying to stay hidden behind the curtain. What I saw made my blood run cold. Sitting on our porch swing was an older woman, maybe in her 50s. She was wearing nothing but a thin nightgown, and it was covered in blood. In her hand, she held a huge kitchen knife. She wasn't moving, just sitting there, staring blankly into the darkness. I froze. My heart was pounding so loudly, I was sure she could hear it. Finally, the fear broke through, and I ran as fast as I could, screaming, straight to my parents' room. But when I got there, I couldn't even form words. I was shaking, crying, trying to explain, but all I could get out were panicked gasps. My parents were confused, and my dad, clearly annoyed, tried to calm me down. When I finally stammered out what I had seen, he sighed heavily, convinced it was just a nightmare. "It's nothing," he said firmly. "Go back to bed." But I refused. I clung to him, crying and screaming, absolutely terrified. Finally, fed up with my outburst, he grabbed my arm and said, "Fine, I'll show you there's nothing there." He started pulling me toward the front door. I was hysterical, kicking and pleading with him to stop, but he wouldn't listen. He unlocked the door, swung it open, and started to say, "See? There's nothing that..." He stopped mid-sentence. I will never forget the look on his face, pure shock and fear, as he stared out at the porch. Slowly, the woman turned to look at us. Her eyes locked onto ours, and she stood up, the knife dangling loosely in her hand. My dad slammed the door shut so hard the house shook. He yelled for my mom to call the police and bolted to the bedroom to grab his shotgun. Moments later, he was back at the door, cracking it open just enough to stick the barrel of the 12-gauge out. He asked her, voice steady but sharp, "What are you doing here?" Her response was chilling. "Somebody killed my husband," she said softly, almost as if she were in a trance. "But it wasn't me." My dad told her the police were on their way, and that's when she snapped. She screamed, clutched the knife tighter, and stormed off into the night. The police found her about 15 minutes later, trying to break into one of our neighbors' houses. She was taken into custody, but I never found out what happened to her after that. All I know is that from that night on, I never slept in the living room again. It was Halloween night, and the house was buzzing with the usual excitement. Kids running around in costumes, bowls of candy ready by the door, and spooky decorations casting eerie shadows on the walls. Everything felt festive, as it always did on Halloween. Then came the knock. It was loud and deliberate, echoing through the house. My friend's dad, thinking it was just another trick-or-treater, got up to answer the door. But when he opened it, he froze. Standing on their porch was a man wearing a bag over his head, completely silent. The air shifted instantly. This wasn't some laughing child in a costume or a group of teenagers looking for candy. This man was different. Tall, imposing, and eerily quiet. "Who are you? What do you want?" my friend's dad demanded, but the man didn't answer. Instead, he made a move to step into the house. Without thinking, Dad reacted. He shoved the man backward, sending him stumbling off the porch. No one expected what happened next. The man fell hard, his head striking the pavement with a sickening crack. Everyone rushed outside, panic spreading like wildfire. It was only then, as they pulled the bag off the man's head, that they realized who it was. It was my friend's grandfather, her mom's dad. He had been trying to pull a Halloween prank on the family, dressing up to give them a harmless scare. But the prank had gone terribly, tragically wrong. They called for an ambulance and he was rushed to the hospital, but the damage was permanent. The fall had left him with a severe brain injury, leaving him unable to care for himself. His wife, who already had health problems, couldn't take care of him either. They both ended up in convalescent care, spending the rest of their lives in a facility. The aftermath of that night didn't stop there. My friend's mom never forgave her husband for what happened. To her, it didn't matter that he hadn't known who was under the bag, or that he was just trying to protect his family. She placed all the blame squarely on his shoulders. Their marriage couldn't survive the guilt, resentment, and pain. They divorced not long after, with the shadow of that Halloween night looming over them forever. I used to work at a funeral home, and one night I had to pull a late shift to prepare a body for a viewing scheduled the next morning. By the time I finished, it was close to midnight, and the snowstorm that had been building all day was now in full swing. When I tried to leave, I realized I was completely snowed in. The roads were buried, and the parking lot was impassable. There was no choice but to stay the night in the funeral home, waiting for the plows to clear things out early in the morning. At first, I tried to tell myself it wasn't a big deal. I found a couch in the small break room and tried to settle in. But as the hours dragged on, the reality of where I was began to sink in. It was dead silent. The kind of silence so thick you could hear every creak, every faint whisper of the wind outside. And then there was the thought, the unavoidable, unnerving thought, that beneath me, down in the basement, there were 20 bodies, 20 dead people. The more I thought about it, the harder it was to stay calm. Every sound made my heart race. The furnace kicking on, a door creaking somewhere. My imagination ran wild. What if someone or something was down there? What if I wasn't alone? I tried to distract myself, scrolling through my phone, but the battery eventually died. That left me sitting there in the dim light of a single lamp, surrounded by shadows and silence, with nothing but my own thoughts to keep me company. I'll tell you this, I've never felt time drag as slowly as it did that night. Every hour felt like an eternity. By the time the snowplows finally showed up in the early morning, I was so on edge I practically sprinted out of there. Even now, I still can't think about that night without feeling a little shiver down my spine. There's something about being alone in a funeral home, surrounded by the dead, that gets under your skin in a way you can't quite shake.